June 1944, Normandy hedger concealed something that made even veteran tank commanders sweat through their uniforms. The Panzer Kampfregen 6, Tiger the Furs. 56 tons of German engineering that changed the rules of armoured warfare before it even fired a shot. When Allied crews heard that distinctive growl of the Maybach HL-230 engine echoing through Norman villages, radio chatter went silent. Blocks who'd faced panzer throws and IVs without flinching suddenly found excuses to check their escape hatches. The Tiger wasn't just a tank, it was theatre. Psychological warfare wrapped in 100 mm of face-hardened armour plate. Wehrmacht propaganda films had done their job brilliantly. Every Allied tanker had seen the footage of 88-metre shells punching through target tanks like they were made of cardboard. The reality matched the myth that 88mm KWK's 36 L56 gun could penetrate 112 mm of armour at 1,000. Your standard M4 Sherman. Its frontal armour maxed out at 76 mm on a good day. Basic mathematics that added up to cremation. British and American tank crews developed what intelligence officers politely termed tiger fright. The unofficial term amongst the lads was rather more colourful. Reports from Normandy document entire Sherman platoon reversing at full speed after a single Tiger round whistled past.
Can't blame them, really.
The Tiger could kill a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman's 75 fleet gun couldn't even scratch German paint. It was like bringing a pocket knife to a howitzer duel. Operation Overlord's planners knew they had a problem. By June 6, 1944, Germany had deployed approximately 1,350 Tiger across all fronts. Normandy would see its share, roughly 120 Tigers, operated by various SS and Wehrmacht heavy tank battalions. Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 101 and 102 alone accounted for dozens of Allied tanks in the first weeks after D-Day. One Tiger could hold up an entire Allied advance, forcing commanders to call in air support or artillery just to shift a single tank. That's not combat efficiency.
That's battlefield dominance.
The Tiger's invincibility wasn't just propaganda, though the Germans certainly exploited it. At the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, Tiger companies routinely engaged Soviet T-34s at ranges exceeding Gwen 500 mm, distances where return fire was genuinely impossible. One Tiger commanded by SS Oberschura France, Stagger reportedly destroyed 22 Soviet tanks in a single engagement. Whether that exact number holds up to scrutiny matters less than what Allied intelligence believed at the time. The Tiger's reputation preceded it like a ghost story, and ghost stories affect morale more than actual ghosts ever could. Normandy's terrain made it worse. Those bloody Villers-Bocage country created natural ambush positions every 50 meters. Attiga could sit hull down behind an earthen bank, only its turret exposed, and pick off Shermans as they emerged from sunken lanes. Allied tank destroyers like the M10 Wolverine mounted 3-in guns that theoretically could penetrate Tiger armor at close range. Theoretically, getting to close range meant crossing open ground, whilst a tank that cost the Wehrmacht 250,000 Reichsmarks turned your Sherman into scrap metal worth considerably less. By late June 1944, Allied Supreme Command faced an uncomfortable truth. They were losing the armor battle before they'd properly started it. Something had to change. Standard doctrine wasn't working. Standard equipment certainly wasn't working. The Germans had produced a Predator, and the Allies were still hunting with museum pieces. The British, characteristically, were already working on something rather clever. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun didn't appear overnight, though by 1944 British officers rather wished it had arrived sooner. Development began back in 1941 when intelligence reports about German heavy tank programs started filtering through to the War Office. The British Directorate of Artillery, led by Brigadier John Pum, recognized something fundamental. The war was accelerating, and so was armor thickness. The trusty 6-pounder and even the newer 75mm guns were going to be obsolete before the ink dried on their specification sheets. Enter the 17-pounder, officially the Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder. The designation referred to the weight of its armor-piercing shot. 17 lb of tungsten cord Fury, traveling at 950 AWS design work, began in earnest in 1941 at Vickers Armstrongs, with the first prototype tested in 1942. By August 1942, the gun entered production. The weapon could penetrate 140 mm of armor at 1,000 blasts using standard armor-piercing shot. With the later armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds, APDS, that figure jumped to 28 mm at $1,000 mini. Those numbers meant something crucial. The 17-pounder could kill a Tiger from the front at combat ranges.
On paper, at least.
The problem, the bloody thing was towed artillery, a magnificent gun certainly over 5 meters long, weighing nearly 3 tons. But it required a truck or a universal carrier to drag it into position. Towed anti-tank guns have one significant disadvantage in mobile warfare.
They don't move once the shooting starts.
German tanks, conversely, did move rather quickly. In fact, a 17-pounder emplacement could knock out a Tiger beautifully, assuming the Tiger was considerate enough to drive directly at it and not, say, approach from the flank or simply blast the position with high explosive shells from 2,000 kilometers away. British tank crews in North Africa were learning this lesson the hard way throughout 1942 and 1943. The
Africa Corps fielded Tiger, starting in late 1942, and British Crusader and
Valentine tanks found themselves catastrophically outgunned. Even the new Cromwell tank, which entered service in 1943 with a decent 75mm gun, couldn't reliably penetrate Tiger armor except at suicidally close ranges. Tank commanders were essentially told to flank Tigers, get behind them, and pray. It's difficult to maintain offensive momentum when your entire tactical doctrine requires divine intervention. The War Office faced mounting pressure. Field reports from Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey's forces in Italy during 1943 painted a grim picture. One Tiger could hold up an entire brigade. British Churchill tanks, heavily armoured but mounting only a 75 mm gun, were reduced to mobile pillboxes, useful for infantry support, but hopeless in tank versus tank combat against German heavies. Something had to bridge the gap between the 17-pounder's killing power and the mobility of a tank chassis. Various proposals emerged. Mount the 17-pounder on the Cromwell. The turret ring was too small. Design an entirely new tank around the 17-pounder. The Challenger tank program attempted exactly that, but development dragged through 1943 with production not starting until 1944. Britain would field only 200 Challengers total, nowhere near enough to matter. The Archer self-propelled gun mounted a 17-pounder on a Valentine chassis, but pointed it backwards, requiring the entire vehicle to reverse into firing positions. Effective, but hardly ideal for mobile warfare. By late 1943, British ordnance engineers were getting desperate. D-Day was coming.
Everyone knew it.
The Germans certainly knew it. When Allied armies landed in France, they would face the best tanks Germany could field in prepared defensive positions. The 17-pounder had to get mobile, and it had to get mobile immediately. Engineers needed a platform that was available in quantity, mechanically reliable, and crucially already in production. They needed the Sherman, and that presented an entirely new set of problems. The M4 Sherman was never designed to mount a gun that large. Not even close. American engineers had built the Sherman around a 75 mm gun with a turret ring diameter of 69 in. Perfectly adequate for what they'd intended. The 17-pounder was a completely different beast. The gun alone measured 196 in from breech to muzzle. It generated recoil forces that could shake apart a turret, not specifically reinforced to handle them. This wasn't a simple swap-out job. This was surgery on a patient who couldn't be anesthetized. The task fell to the Department of Tank Design, at the Ministry of Supply, with Major George Brighty and his team.
Leading the actual engineering work in late
1943, they faced a problem that would have made sensible engineers resign. Fit a gun designed for towed artillery into a tank turret designed for a weapon 2-3 its size. Maintain the tank's mobility.
Keep the crew alive and do it all before the invasion of France. Oh, and make sure it could actually fire without tearing itself apart. Simple. The first hurdle was the turret ring.
The 17-pounder's recoil mechanism was too wide. Standard mounting was impossible. Brighty's team had to rotate the gun 90 degrees on its side, mounting it horizontally offset within the turret. This created its own nightmare. The radio equipment, normally mounted in the turret bustle, had to be relocated to an armoured box welded onto the rear hull. The loader now had to work around a massive gun breech that occupied most of his workspace. Loading the 17-pounder required a specific choreography. The loader had to time his movements with the gun's recoil cycle or risk broken ribs. Then came the ammunition problem. The 17-pounder round was substantially longer than the 70-fibre over 3 FT of brass and projectile. Storage racks designed for stubby American shells wouldn't accommodate British ammunition. Engineers had designed the internal layout, reducing ammunition storage from 97 rounds to just 77. Every shell took up precious internal volume. The crew went from cramped to sardine tin. The gun itself required modification. The standard 17-pounder barrel protruded so far forward that it created handling problems. The weight distribution threw off the tank's balance. Engineers couldn't shorten the barrel without sacrificing muzzle velocity, which rather defeated the purpose. Instead, they added a counterweight to the turret rear and redesigned the gun's cradle assembly. The Sherman's vertical volley suspension, already working overtime with 32 tons, now had to cope with an additional 900 lb of gun assembly hanging off the front. By January 1944, the first prototype underwent trials. The results were promising with significant caveats. The gun fired. The turret survived. The recoil didn't tear mounting bolts through the turret floor. All positive developments. However, the muzzle blast was so severe it kicked up dust clouds that completely obscured the gunner's vision. Firing the main gun without proper ventilation filled the turret with cordite fumes thick enough to choke the crew. Engineers added a muzzle brake and improved the turret's ventilation system, modifications that delayed production but kept crews conscious. The British Army officially designated it the Sherman Firefly ICIC, denoting the hybrid armament configuration. Production began in earnest in March 1944 at Royal Ordnance Factory Leedids and other conversion centres. The process was labour-intensive. Each Sherman had to be stripped, modified and reassembled. Skilled workers could convert roughly 8 Shermans per week per facility. By D-Day, Britain had produced approximately 300 Fireflies. By war's end, that number reached nearly 2,200. The Firefly had one unmistakable identifying feature, that absurdly long gun barrel. It stretched so far forward that German tank crews could identify Fireflies at ridiculous distances, which became a problem rather quickly. The Germans weren't stupid. They recognized that the Sherman with the enormously long gun was the one that could actually hurt them. Fireflies became priority targets. Wehrmacht standing orders by July 1944 explicitly instructed panzer crews to identify and eliminate the long-barrel Sherman first. British crews responded by camouflaging that distinctive barrel, painting the muzzle brake to break up its silhouette, adding foliage, even trying to disguise Fireflies as standard Shermans by painting false barrels on regular tanks. It was visual deception warfare, and lives depended on it. The Firefly's baptism of fire came during Operation Perch in mid-June 1944. The 7th Armoured Division, the famed Desert Rats, pushed towards Villers-Bocage on June 13th, attempting to outflank German positions around Cage. The 4th County of London Yeomanry and the 1st Rifle Brigade formed the spearhead. Among their Shermans rolled several Fireflies, crews still learning how their new weapon handled under combat conditions. What happened next became one of the war's most studied armoured engagements. SS Oberführer Michael Wittmann, commanding Tiger 007 of Schreier, SS Panzer Abelong 101, spotted the British column strung out along the main road, through Villers-Bocage. The British had committed the cardinal sin of armoured warfare, advancing without proper reconnaissance or flank security.
Wittmann attacked.
In roughly 15 minutes, Wittmann's Tiger destroyed between 11 and 14 British vehicles, including multiple Shermans, half-tracks and support vehicles. The column collapsed into chaos. Wittmann's Tiger prowled through Villers-Bocage's streets like a predator in a shooting gallery, firing at near point-blank range. British crews abandoned vehicles.
Some fought back.
None of the return fire penetrated. Here's what the history books often miss. A Firefly was present, possibly two. Sergeant Bobby Bramall commanded one of the Fireflies in that doomed column. When Wittmann appeared, Bramall's crew did engage, but the Tiger was already amongst them, firing from positions where the Firefly couldn't maneuver for a clear shot. Urban combat negated the 17-pounder's range advantage. The Firefly needed distance to exploit its killing power, and Villers-Bocage's narrow streets offered none. Wittmann's Tiger eventually withdrew after British anti-tank guns, the towed 6-pounders, ironically, scored hits that damaged the tank's tracks and optics. The Tiger survived, Wittmann survived. The British column was devastated. Villers-Bocage became a propaganda victory for Germany and a harsh lesson for British armoured doctrine. But the lesson wasn't that Fireflies were useless. The lesson was that Fireflies required different tactics. Within days, British tank commanders began developing new doctrine specifically for Firefly employment. One Firefly per troop of 4 Shermans became standard, the ratio that balanced firepower with availability. The Firefly hung back, positioned to provide overwatch whilst standard Shermans advanced. If a Tiger appeared, the Fireflies engaged from distance whilst other tanks manoeuvred for flank shots or withdrew. Firefly crews learned to exploit terrain. The 17-pounder's high velocity and flat trajectory meant gunners could engage targets at $1,500 meters with reasonable accuracy. Tigers typically engaged at 110 to 1,200 meters. That 300 advantage was survival margin. Firefly commanders sought hold-down positions, defensive spots where only the turret was exposed, and waited. Patience replaced aggression. The Firefly wasn't a brawler. It was a sniper rifle mounted on tracks. By late June, as successes started accumulating on June 25th near KH, a Firefly from the 4th to 7th Royal Dragoon Guards knocked out a Tiger at approximately 1,400 Damasolti. The German crew never even saw what killed them. Similar engagements occurred throughout Normandy. As British crews gained confidence and German crews lost their sense of invulnerability, the numbers started shifting. By July 1944, Firefly-equipped troops were recording kill ratios that made intelligence officers check their arithmetic. A Firefly had roughly a 60% chance of destroying a Tiger or Panther with the first hit at combat ranges. That's not propaganda. That's battlefield mathematics compiled from after-action reports across multiple divisions.
Standard 75 mm Shermans.
Their first hit-kill probability against a Tiger's frontal armor at $1,000 minutes was essentially zero. The 17-pounder changed the equation entirely. Operation Goodwood on July 18, 1944, provided a brutal testing ground. British armor launched a massive assault east of KH. Over 750 tanks committed to breaking through German lines. The Germans had prepared layered defences, including Dugin Panthers and Tigers from multiple heavy tank battalions. British losses were catastrophic. Roughly 400 tanks knocked out in 3 days. But amongst the wreckage, patterns emerged. Fireflies that followed proper doctrine survived. Fireflies that charged ahead like standard Shermans burned like standard Shermans. The 3rd Royal Tank Regiment developed what became known as Overwatch Protocol. 4 tank troops positioned their single Firefly 200 to 300 meters behind the other 3 Shermans. When contact was made, standard Shermans would immediately maneuver to draw German attention. Not suicidally, mind you, but enough to force Tigers or Panthers to button up and engage. The Firefly, already tracking the target, would fire from its overwatch position. German crews suddenly found themselves in a dilemma. Engage the closer Shermans and risk the Firefly, or hunt the Firefly and expose flanks to the others. Sergeant Gordon Scott of the Scots Guards exemplified the new approach during fighting near Cormont in late July. His Firefly troop encountered two Panthers at approximately $1,200 min. Instead of closing distance, Scott positioned his Firefly hold-down and waited for the Panthers to move. When one Panther repositioned to engage advancing infantry, Scott's gunner, Trooper William Hughes, fired. The APDS round penetrated the Panther's turret side, detonating ammunition. The second Panther reversed immediately, crew apparently deciding discretion beat valor. That engagement lasted under 90 seconds. No British casualties.
Ammunition selection became crucial.
The Firefly carried two primary anti-tank rounds: standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap and the newer armor-piercing discarding sabot. APC beast rounds were reliable, good penetration, consistent performance. APDS rounds were devastating but temperamental. The sabot design meant the tungsten penetrator separated from its carrier after leaving the barrel, but early APDS rounds suffered accuracy problems beyond 1,000. M crews learned to reserve APDS for close-range certainty and use APCBC for longer shots, where trajectory predictability
mattered more than raw penetration. British
gunners also discovered the 17-pounder's high explosive round was rubbish for infantry support. The shell was designed primarily for anti-tank work, and its H-filling was inadequate for suppressing infantry or destroying fortifications. This reinforced the Firefly's role. It was a tank killer, not a general-purpose weapon. In practice, this meant Firefly commanders had to resist pressure to use their tanks for infantry support missions. Their job was killing German armor, and every shell wasted on bunkers was one less shell for the Tiger that might appear next. Training evolved rapidly. By August 1944, replacement Firefly crews received specialized instruction at the gunnery school in Ellsworth. Emphasis was placed on first shot kills. The 17-pounder's muzzle flash and smoke signature revealed position immediately, so the first round had to count. Gunners practiced range estimation obsessively. At 1,500 mellers or 1 mirror in range estimation could mean a clean miss. Firefly gunners became the snipers of armored warfare, calculating windage, target speed, and deflection angles that standard Sherman gunners never worried about. August 8, 1944 dawned over Normandy with the sort of grey humidity that made tank interiors feel like boiler rooms. Operation Totalize was underway, a massive Canadian and British push south from Caen towards Files. The objective was to trap German forces in what would become the Files pocket. Among the German defenders, Schreier SS Panera, Abteil 101. Still equipped with Tigers despite mounting losses. And commanding one of those Tigers was Michael Wittmann, the most famous panzer ace in the Wehrmacht. Wittmann's score stood at approximately 138 tank kills, depending on which records you trust. The propaganda machine had turned him into a legend. Knight's Cross with oak leaves featured in newsreels the face of German armoured invincibility. His survival at Villers-Bocage only enhanced the myth. Block on both sides knew his name.
That's rare in warfare.
Most tankers die anonymous. Wittmann was a celebrity in field grey. His Tiger number 007 was positioned near the village of Gamsnil, part of a hasty defensive line attempting to stem the Allied advance. British and Canadian forces were pushing hard. Sherman squadrons from multiple regiments supported by infantry and artillery. The Germans were outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on everything except determination. Wittmann's orders were simple: stop them. What happened next remains one of the war's most debated engagements. Around midday, Wittmann's Tiger was destroyed. That much is certain. The tank was found later, penetrated through the turret, ammunition detonated, crew killed instantly. Wittmann was dead at 30 years old. The myth died with him.
Who killed him?
That's where it gets complicated. Multiple units claim credit. A Firefly from the Northamptonshire Yeomanry, commanded by Sergeant Gordon, reported engaging and destroying a Tiger at approximately the right time and place. Their after-action report is confident one Tiger turret hit confirmed kill. Canadian Sherman crews from the Sherbrooke Fusiliers also claimed Tiger kills that day in the same sector. RAF Typhoons flew ground attack missions nearby, and rocket armed Typhoons had proven lethal against German armor. Historical research suggests the Firefly claim is strongest. Analysis of Tiger 07's wreckage indicated penetration consistent with a 17-pounder APDS round striking the turret side. The precise angle and damage pattern match Firefly engagement, ranges and trajectories. The Canadian claims appear to refer to other Tigers destroyed that day. Schwa SS Panzer Abteil 101 lost multiple tanks during Operation Totalize. The Typhoon claim is possible but less supported by physical evidence. Here's what matters beyond the historical argument. Wittmann's death shattered something psychological. The Germans had built him into a symbol of Tiger invincibility, and the British had killed that symbol. Whether it was Sergeant Gordon's Firefly specifically, or another Allied tank, matters less than the message it sent. Tigers could be killed.
Tiger aces could be killed.
The 18-meter gun didn't grant immortality. German morale took a measurable hit. Prisoners captured after August 8th mentioned Wittmann's death during interrogations. Intelligence officers noted the impact on German tankers' confidence. The invincible Tiger wasn't invincible. The unstoppable ace had been stopped. If Wittmann could die, anyone could die. Allied crews noticed the change immediately. Tigers started withdrawing earlier from engagements. German tank commanders became more cautious, less willing to press attacks or hold exposed positions. The aggressive confidence that characterized German armoured tactics in June had evaporated by late August. The Fireflies had proven they could kill Tigers reliably, and Tigers started acting like it. The myth's collapse was strategic, not just psychological. Myths affect battlefield decisions. A Tiger commander who believes his tank is invincible takes risks. A Tiger commander who knows Fireflies are hunting him becomes conservative. The Germans weren't paralyzed by fear.
Mind you, they adapted.
By September 1944, Wehrmacht tactical manuals were being updated with specific guidance on engaging Fireflies. The instructions were pragmatic. Identify the long-barrel Sherman immediately. Engage from maximum range if possible. Use terrain to close distance without exposure. And prioritize Firefly destruction above all other targets. German tank commanders started positioning Panthers and Tigers in mutually supporting pairs, one tank engaging whilst the other maneuvered for flank shots. Tiger crews developed counter-tactics that exploited the Firefly's weaknesses. The 17-pounder's muzzle blast created an enormous smoke signature far larger than standard tank guns. German gunners learned to watch for that telltale cloud and immediately target its source. Firefly crews who fired and remained stationary rarely survived to fire again. This forced British crews to adopt shoot and scoot tactics. Fire, reverse immediately into cover, reposition before the next shot. It slowed engagement rates but kept crews alive. The bigger problem for Germany wasn't tactical, it was industrial. Tiger production had always been limited. The Tiger Eye was a masterpiece of engineering and an absolute nightmare to manufacture. Each tank required approximately 300,000 man-hours to build. The Maybach engine alone contained dozens of precision components that demanded skilled machinists and specialty steels. By late 1944, Allied bombing had devastated German industrial capacity. The Henschel factory in Kassel, primary Tiger manufacturer, was operating at reduced capacity after sustained RAF raids. Production numbers tell the story. Germany manufactured roughly 147 Tiger total. Between August 1942 and August 1944, when production ceased entirely in favor of the Tiger II, that's barely 60 tanks per month at peak production, Britain was converting Shermans to Firefly standard at rates exceeding 100 per month by mid-1944, and the Americans were delivering standard Shermans to British forces by the hundreds. The mathematics were brutal. Germany couldn't replace losses fast enough. The Tiger II, the König Tiger or King Tiger, was meant to be the answer.
Heavier armor, more powerful gun?
All the invincibility of the Tiger I magnified. In practice, it was too heavy for most bridges, consumed fuel at catastrophic rates, and broke down constantly. Only 489 were ever produced. Each one cost 800,000 Reichsmarks, more than 3 times the cost of a Tiger version. Germany was spending its dwindling resources on weapons it couldn't afford, couldn't maintain, and couldn't deploy in sufficient numbers. Meanwhile, Firefly numbers kept climbing. By October 1944, British armoured divisions had achieved their target ratio, 1 Firefly per 4 tank troop across all Sherman-equipped regiments. That meant roughly 20 to 25 Fireflies per armoured regiment, hundreds across the entire British and Canadian Army groups. The 21st Army Group fielded over 500 Fireflies by the time of the Rhine crossing in March 1945. German tank crews faced a grim reality. Numerical superiority was gone, technological superiority was questionable, and tactical flexibility was constrained by fuel shortages. By December 1944, during the Ardennes offensive, German panzer divisions were operating on captured fuel dumps. Their own supply lines couldn't maintain the offensive. Tigers and Panthers that ran out of petrol were abandoned. Crews rigged them with demolition charges rather than let them fall into Allied hands intact. The Firefly's impact wasn't just destroying individual Tigers. It was forcing Germany to commit resources to countering a weapon that Britain had improvised in workshops. Every tactical adjustment, every revised manual, every training hour spent teaching crews how to identify and engage Fireflies was time and effort Germany couldn't spare. The Third Reich was fighting a multi-front war with dwindling resources, and Britain had introduced a weapon that demanded German attention at exactly the moment Germany had no attention left to spare. The Firefly didn't retire when Germany surrendered. British forces kept them in service through the late 1940s, deploying them to occupation duties in Germany and Austria. Some saw action during the Greek Civil War, where royalist forces used Fireflies against communist insurgents equipped with Soviet armor. The last Fireflies in British service weren't formally retired until 1950, replaced by the Centurion, a tank that owed its existence to lessons learned from the Firefly's success. The Centurion embodied everything the Firefly had proven. It mounted the 17-pounder as its main armament from the start, not as an afterthought crammed into an inadequate chassis. The design philosophy had shifted fundamentally. Firepower was paramount. Armor thickness mattered certainly, but the ability to kill the enemy first mattered more. The Centurion entered service too late for World War II. 6 prototypes arrived in Belgium in May 1945, days after the German surrender. But it went on to become one of the most successful tank designs in history, serving in various forms until the 1990s. Other nations absorbed the lesson. The Soviet T-54, introduced in 1946, mounted in a 100-meter gun, substantially more powerful than the T-34's 85mm American tank. Development shifted away from the Sherman's 75mm standard towards higher velocity guns like the 90mm mounted on the
M26 Persing and later the M46 Patton.
The post-war consensus was universal. The gun wins fights.
Armor just delays defeat.
This represented a philosophical revolution in armoured warfare theory. Pre-war doctrine, particularly British and French doctrine, had emphasized armor protection. Tanks were meant to bemobile fortresses absorbing punishment, whilst infantry advanced behind them. The Tiger. I embodied this thinking, taken to its logical extreme. A nearly impenetrable bunker on tracks. The Firefly proved that approach obsolete. A gun capable of penetrating any armor-rendered armor thickness, almost secondary. Better to mount a devastating gun on a mobile platform than build an invulnerable fortress that couldn't kill its opponents. The improvisation aspect became its own lesson. Britain had taken an existing available platform and modified it under urgent wartime conditions into something that matched or exceeded purpose-built German designs. The Firefly hadn't been planned. It wasn't the product of 5-year development programs and industrial coordination. It was engineers solving an immediate problem with available tools. That improvisational success challenged assumptions about military procurement and design timelines that persist in defense planning even today. The Firefly also validated the concept of weapons upgrades over complete replacement. Modern militaries still follow this model. Upgrade existing platforms rather than design entirely new systems. American M1 Abrams tanks from the 1980s remain in service today, continually upgraded with better guns, armor, and electronics. The principle is pure Firefly. Don't wait for the perfect solution when a good enough solution exists now. Yet the most enduring legacy might be psychological. The Firefly demonstrated that technological intimidation can be overcome by clever engineering and tactical adaptation. The Tiger had dominated battlefields through a combination of genuine capability and psychological warfare. The Firefly broke both. It killed tigers, and in doing so it killed the myth. Soldiers remembered that lesson. Fearsome weapons can be countered. Invincibility is illusion, and adaptability beats brute force. When Thelast Fireflies were finally scrapped in the early 1950s, they'd already secured their place in military history. Not as the best tank of World War II, they weren't. Not as the most produced or most reliable, far from it, but as the tank that proved invincibility was a propaganda construct, and that British ingenuity could turn an American mass-production tank into a tiger killer. That reputation alone was worth the cramped turrets and awkward ammunition storage. The Germans had thought their tigers were invincible. The 17-pounder said otherwise, and said it rather loudly.